It looked like a drill. It felt like a hunt, but it ended like a warning. In Southern Comfort, 1981, a routine National Guard training mission transforms into something far more primal. 9 soldiers march into the Louisiana bayou with blank ammunition, unclear orders, and unearned confidence. They believe they're in control. They believe the wilderness will cooperate. But the swamp doesn't care about their rank, their map, or their rules. Directed by Walter Hill, the film walks a fine line between psychological thriller and quiet war story. It's not loud, it's not fast, but it cuts deep. Critics argued over what it really meant. Some called it an allegory for America's trauma after Vietnam. Others insisted it was a story about internal collapse. Hill, of course, claimed it was neither. Still, the metaphors lingered like fog. Filmed in the dense, inhospitable Atchafalaya Basin, Southern Comfort was as difficult to make as it is to watch. Cast and crew endured treacherous terrain, unpredictable weather, and emotionally draining scenes shot under exhausting conditions. And somewhere between fiction and frustration, a strange authenticity emerged not just in performance, but in atmosphere. There are no clear heroes here, no triumphant return, just men slowly unraveling, not from bullets, but from fear. Fear of the land, fear of each other, and fear of realizing they were never prepared for any of this. These are 20 weird facts you didn't know about Southern Comfort, a film where the only thing more dangerous than the enemy is the illusion that there isn't one. Fact Hesson, the blood in this scene wasn't special effects. Most war films simulate violence. This one crossed a line. In a brief but unsettling moment midway through Southern Comfort, the squad encounters a wild hog. What follows looks chaotic: gunfire, shouting, confusion. But what few realized at the time was that the animal wasn't acting. It wasn't a prop. It was real, and so was its death. According to accounts from the set, the hog was intentionally placed in the scene, cornered, and then shot with live ammunition. Not blanks, not tricks, real bullets fired during the take. The crew didn't stop rolling. The scene made it into the final cut. Animal rights advocates weren't present. Oversight was minimal. This was 1,980 seconds filmmaking in a swamp, remote, unsupervised, and ruled by the director's instincts. Walter Hill later defended the moment as an expression of brutal realism. Some crew members disagreed. One said it shifted the mood of the entire production. Another walked off set. There were no legal consequences, no studio statements. But the footage remains raw, brief, and undeniably real. It's easy to miss on first watch, but once you know, it becomes impossible to unsee. Because when a film kills for authenticity, you have to ask, what else did they sacrifice? Fact #2. The set broke the cast before the script did. No actor walked into Southern Comfort expecting comfort. But they weren't ready for what they got either. Filming in the Atchafalaya swamp meant 12-hour days waist-deep in cold, muddy water, boots filled with leeches, sweat soaked through uniforms by morning. Mosquitoes swarmed unchecked. There were no trailers to retreat to, only tree cover and exhaustion. Walter Hill encouraged it. The suffering adds texture, he reportedly told a producer. The result? Tempers snap. Fred Ward was known for being tough, but even he cracked during one overnight shoot. After trudging through muck for 8 takes straight, he reportedly yelled, "This isn't a movie, it's a punishment." He wasn't alone. Powers Booth refused to speak between setups. Keith Carradine kept his distance from the crew, focusing inward. At least one supporting actor quit and was replaced without public explanation. And yet, Hill captured something undeniable. The actors look miserable because they were. The paranoia isn't performed, it's lived. In the final cut, when characters scream, stumble, or seethe, the line between role and reality blurs. Sometimes the best direction is no comfort at all. Fact #3. Walter Hill insisted it wasn't about Vietnam, so why does it feel like it is? From its first screenings, Southern Comfort was labeled a Vietnam metaphor. The symbolism seemed obvious. A group of soldiers lost in hostile territory, facing an unseen enemy, slowly collapsing under pressure and pride. But Hill didn't just downplay the comparison, he rejected it outright. "This is about survival," he told one interviewer. "If it were about war, I'd have said so." Still, viewers weren't convinced. The parallels were overwhelming. The soldiers march in without understanding the land. They misread the culture. They provoke a response they can't control. By the end, they're not fighting anyone. They're fighting fear and themselves. Even the use of blanks in their rifles felt deliberate. Noise without impact, power without force. A metaphor for something larger? Perhaps. Critics debated it for years. Some called it cowardice. Others believed Hill was being strategic, letting the audience draw conclusions without guiding them. Interestingly, many cast members believed the allegory was real. One said, "We knew what we were making, we just weren't allowed to say it." Maybe Hill's denial wasn't about avoiding controversy, but about letting the film speak in silence. Because sometimes, the loudest truths are the ones no one wants to admit out loud. Fact #4. The most menacing characters never said a word. Silence isn't neutral. In Southern Comfort, it's a weapon. The Cajun hunters, the faceless threat that stalks the National Guard squad, remain virtually mute throughout the film. No taunts, no demands, no negotiations. Their silence becomes more unsettling than any scream. But it wasn't always scripted that way. Early drafts of the screenplay gave the Cajuns a few lines. Basic threats, warnings, short bursts of tension in broken English. But as pre-production moved forward, Walter Hill began trimming them down, then removing them entirely. The decision was intentional. He wanted to make them unknowable. "They're not villains," Hill reportedly said. "They're consequence." By erasing their voices, the Cajuns became something else, not characters, but manifestations. They aren't evil, they simply react. And because we never hear from them, we can't humanize them, justify them, or reason with them. That absence of communication pushed the film into a new psychological space. The soldiers aren't just being hunted, they're being silenced by an enemy that doesn't need to explain itself. Critics debated whether the decision stripped nuance or added mystique, but most agree on one thing: what you can't understand is always more terrifying than what you can. Fact #5. The ending was designed to leave you unsettled, not satisfied. Most survival thrillers end with a fight, a final confrontation, a climactic release of everything that's built up. Southern Comfort doesn't give you that. It gives you confusion. After everything, the deaths, the chase, the unraveling, two soldiers stumble into a Cajun village celebration. Music blares, people dance, the camera lingers on faces that feel too warm, too calm, too normal. There's food, smiles, suspicion. Then the film ends. Originally, that wasn't the plan. Hill had written a final showdown, a violent clash between the survivors and their unseen pursuers. It was gritty, bloody, final, but he changed it. Test screenings revealed that audiences weren't scared, they were satisfied. And that, Hill believed, was the real failure. So he pulled back, removed the confrontation, left the ending ambiguous, anxious, and unresolved. The final cut refuses to confirm anything. Are the villagers part of the threat? Was it all a misunderstanding? Have the soldiers escaped or just stepped into another kind of trap? There are no answers. Just an accordion, a fire pit, and two men who don't know whether to eat or run. And when the danger wears a smile, there's no way to know you're safe. Fact #6. Fred Ward's blood on screen was his own. Fred Ward never asked for comfort, and he certainly didn't get any. During a physically demanding sequence where his character charges across unstable terrain and plunges into swamp water, something went wrong. Beneath the murk, a jagged branch caught his leg, slicing open his shin. The pain was real. The blood was his. The crew moved to stop the take, but Ward waved them off. He wrapped the gash with cloth, gritted his teeth, and did it again. Same leap, same fall. No stunt double. The injury stayed hidden, but the impact was there. Walter Hill kept the footage, not for shock value, but because it worked. Ward's limp in later scenes wasn't added for drama. It was continuity, born of pain. When asked about the incident years later, Ward said, "That scene hurt, but it helped the story." And he was right. There's a weight to his performance, a heaviness that feels too grounded to be imagined. Because when fiction draws blood, it leaves something behind that can't be acted. Fact #7. Keith Carradine didn't break character, but the swamp almost broke him. Keith Carradine was cast for stability. His character was meant to be the level-headed one, the emotional compass amid chaos. And that's exactly how he performed. Measured, internal, composed. But that composure came at a cost. Unlike other cast members who vented frustration outward, Carradine turned inward. Between takes, he rarely spoke. He would stand off to the side, not rehearsing lines, just staring. Some called it focus. Others whispered it was fatigue bordering on collapse. One sequence nearly pushed him over the edge. During a nighttime shoot involving a sinking boat, the vessel capsized early. Carradine, weighed down by gear, went under for longer than planned. When he surfaced, cold and shaken, he didn't break character. He simply delivered the line and kept going. That take stayed in the film. What makes Carradine's performance unsettling is that it never explodes. It tightens. His silences stretch longer. His eyes track danger more cautiously. It doesn't feel like a man holding it together. It feels like someone who's already fractured, just hiding it well. And sometimes, The stillest character in the scene is the one drowning the slowest. Fact hashite. The swamp didn't just look alive, it sounded like it was watching. From the first frame, Southern Comfort feels wrong. Not because of what you see, but because of what you hear. The distant whistles, the dissonant echoes, the kind of noise that doesn't register as danger, but activates something ancient in your nerves. That was Alan Splett's design. Rather than use traditional sound design techniques, Splett built a sonic landscape meant to destabilize. He layered, manipulated animal calls, frog croaks slowed down, bird chirps reversed, and embedded low-frequency pulses designed to replicate anxiety without musical cues. In one key scene, where the group suspects they're being tracked, there's no soundtrack at all, just silence. Then, buried in that silence, a frequency barely audible, a kind of ambient heartbeat. Viewers reported feeling nervous for reasons they couldn't explain. Splett later admitted, "I didn't want them to hear the swamp. I wanted them to feel like it was hearing them." That unease lasts long after the credits roll, because when sound becomes surveillance, the environment stops being scenery and starts becoming the threat. Fact #9. They filmed in contaminated land and told no one until it was too late. The swamp in Southern Comfort isn't a set. It's real, untouched, and, for a brief time during production, potentially toxic. Parts of the Atchafalaya Basin, used for filming, had recently been flagged due to livestock contamination, a bacterial outbreak affecting soil and water. Local authorities issued warnings, but production had already begun. Halting meant losing weeks, so they didn't halt. Crew members noticed something was off. The water smelled metallic. Insects were unusually aggressive. Within days, a camera assistant developed a persistent rash. An actor reported dizziness and stomach pain. Medical staff quietly switched everyone to bottled water. Swimming scenes were minimized, but no official announcement was made. Hill continued shooting. The footage remained in the final cut lush, eerie, and tainted. No one sued. No headlines followed. But ask anyone who worked those days, and they'll tell you, the fear wasn't just in the script, because when a horror film chooses realism over safety, the danger doesn't stay on screen. Fact #0. Powers Booth wasn't their first choice, just the only one who said yes. Casting the role of Hardin was never going to be easy. The character needed to be emotionally distant, instinctively watchful, and quietly dangerous, all without ever raising his voice. Several actors were approached, none accepted. The reason? The swamp. Rumors spread early in pre-production. Long hours, no trailers, real bugs, real mud. It's not a shoot, it's a swamp baptism. One agent reportedly joked while turning the offer down. Powers Booth said yes. At the time, Booth had just won acclaim for playing Jim Jones. He was intense, methodical, and completely unafraid of roles that explored moral rot. Hill saw that and knew he'd found the right kind of control. Booth didn't mingle. He didn't complain. He came to set, stayed silent between takes, and delivered exactly what Hill wanted. Detachment, cold logic, coiled tension. What makes his performance memorable is what's not there. No theatrics, no breakdown, just eyes watching everyone else fall apart, inch by inch. Because sometimes the most unnerving person in the room is the only one still thinking clearly. Fact #9. The fog was manufactured and nearly set the swamp on fire. Some of the film's most iconic visuals, trees disappearing into mist, figures swallowed by gray, were created using industrial fog machines. The real swamp was too unpredictable. Nature wasn't giving them atmosphere, so they built it. But the machines weren't made for the bayou's wet heat. On one particularly humid day, the synthetic fog began to cling not just to the air, but to the crew's equipment. It coated cameras. It slicked cables. Worst of all, it infiltrated a diesel generator's ventilation. That generator caught fire. The blaze was small, contained in minutes, but the panic it caused was real. Crew dropped gear. Someone yelled "back" so loud it echoed across the basin. Filming stopped for half a day. Hill wasn't rattled. He checked playback. The smoke looked perfect. They used that take because when you create danger to capture danger, sometimes the difference between fiction and incident is only measured in minutes. Fact #2. The studio marketed a war film and got a psychological collapse. The original trailers for Southern Comfort are jarring if you've seen the film. Gunshots, explosions, taglines like "War isn't always declared." It plays like a forgotten entry in the Rambo franchise. But that's not the movie Hill made. Executives panicked during early test screenings. The pacing was too slow, the story too murky, the ending too ambiguous. So they did what studios do, they rebranded. Posters featured rifles, The score was re-edited for the trailer to include percussion-heavy war drums. Dialogue was cherry-picked to sound aggressive. Audiences came in expecting fire and fury. What they got was fog and fear. The reaction was immediate. Walkouts. Confused reviews. Critics didn't pan the film, they panned the mismatch. An existential film dressed like a shoot-'em-up, one columnist wrote. Hill was furious, but powerless. Over time, the film found its true audience viewers who weren't looking for action, but atmosphere, paranoia, ambiguity. Because if you sell a descent into madness as a rescue mission, don't be surprised when no one feels safe. Fact Hasson 3. A character died but only in the edit. Continuity is sacred on set, except when it isn't. At some point in Southern Comfort, a member of the squad simply stops appearing. He's there in one scene, mud-covered, breathing hard. Then he's gone. No blood, no scream, no aftermath. This wasn't an editing error, it was a pivot. Midway through production, the actor playing that soldier left the shoot reportedly due to illness or a scheduling conflict. Rather than reshoot or recast, Walter Hill made a different choice. Don't acknowledge it at all. Let the character vanish. No line of dialogue explains it. No one mourns him. The film simply moves on. Just as confused and fragmented as the men on screen. It's easy to miss, but once you notice it, the silence around it becomes chilling. Not just because he's gone, but because no one cares or remembers. And that absence feels intentional. Because in Southern Comfort, the scariest thing isn't dying. It's not being missed. Fact Hasson 4. The music was authentic until they made it unsettling. The final scene is jarring, not because of violence, but because of its strange calm, a Cajun celebration, dancing, laughter, music. But the music doesn't sound quite right. The score was recorded live by real Cajun musicians, accordion, fiddle, percussion, all local. But in post-production, sound designer Alan Splett warped it, slowed tempos, altered pitch, looped phrases that almost but don't quite resolve. He took something warm and made it feel haunted. The result? A celebration that feels like it's mocking the characters who survived and the audience watching them. Something's off. Something's too cheerful, too bright, like a mask that's grinning too wide. Even viewers who don't notice the manipulation feel the unease. Because sound doesn't need to be loud to be intrusive. Sometimes joy when placed next to violence becomes the cruelest sound of all. Fact Hasson 5. One country banned the film without saying why. Southern Comfort wasn't banned for gore, or profanity, or sex. It was banned, briefly, in at least one country, likely France or the Philippines, for a reason that was never publicly explained. The official line? Thematic concern, which, in diplomatic terms, usually means too political. The film's depiction of military failure, cultural arrogance, and violent escalation hit close to home in regions still processing their own histories of occupation or internal conflict. The enemy in the film isn't clearly defined, neither is the justification for violence. For some governments, that ambiguity was unacceptable. Walter Hill didn't protest. He didn't explain. When asked, he simply said, if someone sees themselves in the story, maybe that's the part worth listening to. The ban was lifted quietly years later. No edits were made. But for a time, the silence spoke louder than any scene. Because stories don't always need to be rewritten to become dangerous sometimes, they just need to be noticed. Fact Hasson 6. He was supposed to survive until the swamp had other plans. In early versions of the script, one soldier had a full arc, cowardice to courage, fracture to leadership. His survival was meant to balance the hopelessness, a small note of redemption in a collapsing story. But halfway through production, the arc was erased. The actor wasn't told immediately. It showed up in the call sheet first his scenes after page 72 had vanished. When he asked Hill why, the director reportedly replied, "You disappeared, just like in real life." His absence isn't given a scene. He's just no longer there. 1 minute in the frame, the next erased. To viewers, it might play like a mistake. But in the context of Southern Comfort, it feels like design. No final words, no body, just another man swallowed by the swamp. And maybe that's more truthful than any written ending, because not every disappearance is cinematic, some are just silent. Fact Hasson 7. The costumes weren't designed to look rotten, they already were. Authenticity has a smell. On the set of Southern Comfort, it smelled like mildew, sweat, and decay. Rather than have costumes fabricated, the production used actual National Guard fatigues sourced from surplus depots in the South. Many had been in storage for years. Some were damp, others had stains no one could explain. At least one had mold blooming in the inner seams. Actors complained, rashes appeared, boots crumbled mid-scene, but Walter Hill refused replacements. He wanted every inch of the frame to reek of collapse, even if no one on screen ever mentioned it. So the uniform stayed, and what began as discomfort became performance. Shoulders slumped, movements stiffened. You can see it in the film not just in what they wear, but in how it wears them down. Sometimes the costume doesn't serve the character, it infects them. Fact Hasson 8. That flicker of fire wasn't planned, but it made the final cut. One of the most atmospheric moments in Southern Comfort comes during a torchlit search. Shadows stretch, faces flicker. The swamp seems to breathe with flame, but that beauty came dangerously close to disaster. To light the scene without electricity, the crew used real torches, soaked in kerosene and handheld by actors. One slipped during a take. The flame landed in dry underbrush, igniting a quick burst of fire just off frame. No one was hurt. A crew member stomped it out immediately, but Hill kept rolling. That exact take, the one where a flicker of panic crosses an actor's face, made it into the final film. Most audiences never notice, but something about the energy shifts, because it wasn't just heat, it was threat. And sometimes, the moment you fear is the moment you accidentally capture best. Fact Hassan 9. The audience laughed, so they cut the scene. It was supposed to be the film's emotional peak. In one now-deleted scene, a soldier breaks under pressure. He fires wildly into the trees, screams something incoherent, then drops to his knees in exhaustion. The crew called it gutting. The actor delivered it raw, unrehearsed, trembling. Hill called it the moment where the veneer finally shatters. Then came the test screening. The audience laughed. Maybe it was the timing, maybe the framing, maybe it was just too much, too soon. But what was meant to feel like psychological collapse registered as melodrama. The crowd chuckled, not cruelly nervously. That was enough. Hill cut the scene immediately. No re-edit, no adjustments. He shelved the footage and never spoke of it again. The actor, devastated, called it his best work. Others agreed, but the director had his line. If they laugh when they should be scared, you've already lost them. And so, the film lost a moment and gained something colder in its place. Because sometimes the most vulnerable performances don't fail on screen. They fail in the silence of a room full of people who don't understand what they're feeling. Fact #20. The title was changed to be more marketable, but it became the real metaphor. Originally, the film was called The Enemy, blunt, ambiguous, and hard to pin down. It raised the obvious question, who's the enemy here? The answer was too complicated for the studio. Executives pushed for something warmer, something regional, something that wouldn't scare off an audience looking for action. They landed on Southern Comfort, the name of a whiskey briefly mentioned in the film. It sounded cozy, approachable, safe. Hill hated it. He believed the new title undercut the message. It sells something we never promised, he reportedly said, and maybe that's why it fits. Because Southern Comfort isn't comforting, it's a mirage, a trick of light in the swamp. And by the end, the phrase feels like irony sharpened into a weapon. When the name of the film becomes its final betrayal, maybe the title knew more than the characters ever did. Bonus fact, one soldier just disappears, and nobody notices. In a film about disorientation, the most disorienting thing isn't the enemy. It's the absence you don't see until it's too late. Somewhere in the middle of Southern Comfort, a character vanishes. No gunshot, no blood, no goodbye. One moment, he's part of the group trudging through mud, glancing over his shoulder like everyone else. The next, gone. There's no reaction, no line of dialogue that acknowledges the loss, no shift in formation. The squad just continues. It wasn't a creative twist. It was logistics. The actor left the production early illness, scheduling, or something more complicated. The story was too far along to rework around it. So Hill made a choice, leave the hole where he was. That hole is what makes the moment powerful. In war, people vanish, not always with an explosion, sometimes with a quiet absence, and the system moves forward anyway. The mission keeps rolling, the unit adjusts, or doesn't. Viewers almost never catch it, but once you do, it rewires the film. Every face becomes fragile. Every formation feels temporary. The silence surrounding the disappearance says more than any line of dialogue could. Because the greatest erasure doesn't come with a bullet, it comes with forgetting someone was ever there. You don't survive Southern Comfort by understanding it. You survive it by accepting that nothing is explained and maybe nothing was supposed to be. This wasn't just a film about fear. It was about the fear you don't name. The kind that seeps in, reshapes you, and then leaves you asking whether the danger was ever really outside. Now, we want to hear from you. Was this film a reflection of a war no one wanted to admit? Or a mirror held up to something even closer to home? Tell us what unsettled you most, and what film you want us to dissect next.